This guy, back when I was in high school. I'm a woman, turning 19 this year, and I was 15, almost 16, at the time of the events. When I was 15, I had just started my first year in high school. Around the same time, I created my first Twitter account, which I deleted after this incident. A few details. I hadn't shared my @ with anyone, not even my family, and certainly not my friends because I didn't really have any. My profile picture was an avatar, like here, so no photos of me, and I had set Paris as my location because I live in the suburbs, and it's quicker. I didn't have many followers, around 30, and I didn't follow a lot of people, so it wasn't very interesting, and I didn't go there often. One October evening, I received a somewhat strange private message. It was an account with maybe 200 followers, and the message said,
"Hi, my name is Paul, I just turned 17, and I wanted to know if you live because I'm moving, and I'll be going to school there, looking for friends to make."
Being the city where I went to high school. I immediately sensed something was off because was not displayed anywhere on my profile. However, after some thought, I remembered tweeting something about the buses not passing, and I thought that's probably how he found me. His age didn't shock me because I was 2 years ahead of my classmates. Since I was bored and he had been polite, I replied that yes, I did live in and went to school there. The conversation flowed naturally, and we talked a lot that evening, mainly about school, cafeteria food, teachers to avoid, those kinds of things. But a bit later in the evening, he started slipping in more personal questions about me, like,
"Do you live far from school? In a house or an apartment? Do you still have both your parents? Do you get along with your family? Are you 5? You must not be alone at home often, right?"
I didn't answer because I found it strange, and unfortunately, he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he had, I probably would have blocked him, avoiding what came next. The next day, the same thing happened. We talked a lot, and he kept asking more personal questions to get to know each other, so I asked him some too, and he always answered with what seemed to be complete honesty. I always avoided his questions about where I lived, because he had no business knowing that. This went on for 2 or 3 weeks. Like an idiot, I had started developing feelings. At the same time, the guy was good-looking, super nice to me, which was enough because I've always been a loner, given that I was bullied for most of my school years. In fact, even today, being a little nice to me is enough for me to consider you my best friend, or even more. The main problem this poses is that with feelings comes a blind trust that I unfortunately give to almost anyone, even unconsciously. So our conversations lasted for several weeks, and then, just before the start of the All Saints' Day holidays, he told me he was coming to my high school. His mother had finalized their move, and he wanted to surprise me, looking for a place to meet the next day. Excited, I gave him a time and a place, but when I told him we would be surrounded by people, he said he didn't want that, would prefer an isolated place because he was afraid he wouldn't recognize me and didn't want to spend his break looking for me. I sympathized, and I indicated the 3rd floor restroom, where we're not supposed to be outside of class hours, so we'd be alone. For me, I was still in the school, nothing could happen. The next day, I got ready, made myself pretty for our first meeting, counted the minutes, and finally, recess came, and I ran to the restroom, touched up my makeup, and waited. And it was indeed him who showed up, it wasn't a catfish. He looked like his profile picture, but I noticed he seemed older than I thought, guessing he was 20 rather than 17. We talked, got along great, I was over the moon, and he suggested taking me to a fast food place for lunch, which I refused because I didn't have any money on me, and I never let anyone pay for me, it's a principle of mine. He seemed disappointed but quickly recovered, suggesting waiting for me after school to walk me home. I explained that I had to take the bus, but he could accompany me to the bus stop, and he once again looked disappointed but agreed. That's exactly what happened, and it quickly became a sort of routine. We met in the 3rd floor restroom during the 10 o'clock recess, and in the evening, he walked with me to the bus stop. Interestingly, I never ran into him in the hallways or at the cafeteria, but I thought it was normal because the building was huge and tall, and there were more than 1,500 students, so it only took our schedules not to coincide for us never to cross paths. This little game went on until December, for about a month, almost a month and a half. On December 14th, a Thursday, during a conversation, I complained because my dad had gone on a work trip, my brother was always at his friend's, my sister was on a school trip, and this time, my mom had to stay late at work. I was imprudent, but after several weeks of conversation, I thought I could trust him, especially with my feelings and my problems with too quickly given trust. In the evening, he walked me to the bus stop. I got on, waved to him, put on my headphones, and sat down. I had 2 stops before mine. It was 5:45 p.m., already dark, and when I got off the bus, I immediately had a strange feeling. There was an unpleasant sensation in my stomach, and I felt watched. My reflex was to cut the music, but keep my headphones to pretend I couldn't hear anything around me, and that's probably what saved my life. I lived in a residential neighborhood, separated from the main road by an apartment building, so it was always very quiet, even when there was passing traffic. I left the avenue to enter my neighborhood, and my feeling of being spied on intensified. When I heard footsteps behind me, I knew I was right, that someone was following me. Fortunately, I heard that he wasn't speeding up, he matched his steps to mine, so he wasn't trying to catch up, maintaining a distance between us, for now, and I had no idea how long it would last. I slipped my hand into my pocket to grab my keys, took them out quietly, and suddenly, I sprinted home, hoping the element of surprise would give me enough time to open my door and, more importantly, close it. And the bluff worked. I don't know how I did it, but I did. I deactivated the alarm at home, which unfortunately confirmed that I was alone. I leaned against the door and breathed. My front door has glass panels, meaning that if I stand up, I can see what's happening outside, but also if someone outside wants to see what's happening inside, they can. I hesitated for a moment, and when I straightened up, I looked through the window and saw Paul, on the road, a few meters away, staring at me with a creepy look on his face. He followed me home, probably by car, and he clearly had bad intentions. I couldn't try the bluff of saying that I wasn't alone because he knew it was false, and I still wonder why I didn't just call the police. Fear paralyzed me literally, I couldn't move. We stared into each other's eyes for a good minute until I regained control of my body. After making sure I had locked the door, I ran to the kitchen to grab a knife. By the time I returned to the front door, he was there too, and he pounded on it. First with punches to break the glass, but when he saw me coming with my knife, he started kicking hard to break the lock. That moment, pushing against the door, praying that it would hold, while he was hitting harder and harder, felt like the longest of my life. It must have lasted 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. When he finally realized the door wouldn't give in, he stopped and started circling the house, knocking on every shutter he found, trying to open them to access the windows, but again, none of them gave way. He came back to the door, looking quite annoyed, and I thought it was going to be a second round, but my neighbor's car parked on the sidewalk at that moment, and Paul fled, probably thinking it was my mother coming home. I waited in the dark for 2 hours until my mother came home, knife in one hand and phone in the other. I quickly checked that everything was locked, which fortunately was the case, and I sat silently with my back to the door until I recognized the sound of my mother's car parking. I went up to my room before she entered, and I didn't tell her anything because, to me, this story was behind me. But I was wrong. What followed was not as violent as what I experienced that night, but it's important that I talk about it. On Twitter, Paul harassed me with insulting messages and threats until I blocked him and deleted the conversation. His account was then deleted, and quickly, accounts that had just been created started following me. They all had an it consisting of a string of numbers and the first letter of his name, and as soon as I blocked one, another one would follow me and send me similar messages. I had to block about 50 accounts in total, and that's where I made a mistake. I eventually permanently deleted my Twitter account because I couldn't take it anymore. And I didn't think to reactivate it in time. Later, at school, I asked people who were supposed to be in Paul's class, but none of them had heard of him. This guy was not in my high school at all, that's why I never ran into him outside our daily meetings, and my first impression was probably correct. He probably wasn't 17 but at least in his 20s. I never heard about Paul again after that day. I didn't file a complaint, first because I was a minor and didn't want to talk to my parents about it, as I'm very embarrassed to have fallen for it, but also because I have no evidence. As I said, I deleted my Twitter account, he did too. I deleted our exchanges. I had no photos of him or of what we said. I'm 99% sure the name he gave me was fake. I didn't even have his last name. I only have a vague description and my testimony. It's not enough to file a complaint, as frustrating as it may be. I often wondered what he wanted from me, and the answer that seems most credible is human trafficking, because all his behaviors resemble a pattern leading to kidnapping, targeting a girl online with little presence, becoming friendly, breaking into her school to get closer to her, waiting for her to be vulnerable to follow and harm her. It's clearly not just a sex story. I'm making this post not to be told to go to the police. I won't change my mind about that, but to warn that it doesn't only happen in the USA, not in rough suburbs, not just to others. Be careful when approached on the internet. No need to become paranoid. I later met very good people on Twitter, and not everyone wishes you harm, but stay cautious. A little more vigilance would have probably spared me all this. I was very lucky because I turned a blind eye to many red flags, and yet I'm fine. I don't have post-traumatic stress disorder. I wasn't hurt or kidnapped, but that's not the case for everyone. Please be careful. And if you're parents, talk to your children. It will likely annoy them, but it's essential to keep track of your kids' relationships, especially online relationships, and if I had a little more trust in my parents, I could have talked to them, before or after it happened.